our next program is January 14th at 7 p.m. via Zoom. Look for the email with that Zoom link. It is Inclusive Research Initiatives at ACCA, Engaging the Public in Avian Studies. That'll be presented by Evan McGreeth, who's the Director of Conservation Research at ACCA. We also have some upcoming field trips. This Saturday, November 16th, is the Cheat Lake Waterfowl trip. It's one of our best trips that we have. We can see a lot of things there. Derek will meet at Chestnut Ridge Church parking lot at 8 a.m. because Ruby and Catchy's is no longer open. But he will be at Almost Heaven Cafe at 7 a.m. if you want to socialize and get some breakfast beforehand. And then January 11th, we have our OWL program and walk at the West Virginia Botanical Garden that is partnered with ACCA. And then just some reminders, any board members, we will have a meeting November 18th via Zoom at 7 p.m. Okay, and then I'll let Peter, while I introduce him, bring up his slides. Let's see.
I guess I have to reshare.
Okay.
Let
me know if issues because I don't know. Okay, so our speaker today is, let me bring up my notes, is presented by Peter. Is it Sanger?
Sanger.
Sanger. So I apologize.
No worries there.
Okay. And it is the Occupian Ornithological Specialist at Muhlenberg College in Lehigh, Altadena. Is that?
Oh no, Lee Altadena is one of my co-conspirators with the Bird Window Collision Working Group. He was going to join us in this presentation, but he has a family member that was scheduled for surgery this morning that still hasn't happened. So he's unable to attend. But
well, so we are really looking forward to your presentation on bird collision. So I'll let you start.
So one thing I want to do is make sure everyone can hear me properly. If not, I'll go to a headset. And two, I don't know where the banner of our pictures, you know, the Hollywood Squares is on your screen. If it's covering any of the part of the slides, I can move mine around, but I don't think it affects your screen. Can you see the entire slide?
Yeah, I hear you well and can see the whole slide.
Okay, then I'll begin. So welcome. I'm Peter Sanger. I work at Muhlenberg College in Allentown, Pennsylvania. I wear many hats, but my day job is being a manager of the Bird Museum at Muhlenberg College and taking students bird watching. So life is tough for me. And doing research with Dr. Clem on bird window collisions. So it's a nice small group, so we can keep this real and formal. But I want to start out with a few leading questions that please chime in. Somebody want to give me an idea what you think the leading cause of avian mortality is in this world? Anyone?
Cats.
Cats, okay. Has anybody ever heard of a bird hit a window?
Windows. Yep.
Yes, no?
Yes.
Okay. Do you think that most birds that fly off after a collision are okay?
They fly off, but I think they're probably okay.
Okay. And when and where do most strikes occur?
Oh,
Where do you think most birds hit windows?
urban areas.
Yeah, they're
City
all trick
centers.
questions, I'll say. And what can be done to effectively reduce bird window collisions?
Stop the reflection.
Right. So these and many more questions I hope to answer in this. So the idea of the talk is to point out how big of a deal bird window collisions are and what can be done to reduce them. Again, tell me if the slides aren't appearing properly. So we all love birds. They're pretty. Find great enjoyment in them. We do a lot of things to bring more into our yards. Water features, natural native plantings, everything so we can see them better. The problem is we have windows, and we added this slide because the first version of this PowerPoint turned out to be so depressing. People really were very upset. So we tried to lighten it up a little bit. But the fact is, ever since windows were manufactured or glass was manufactured, it's been killing birds. And the painful fact is, it's killing lots of birds because there are lots of windows, urban sprawl, cities, there's glass everywhere in the built environment. Dr. Clem, my colleague, started studying bird window collisions in 1974. And after 50 years of studying it, he's still trying to get people to pay attention to the problem. He couldn't even get his original papers published in bird conservation journals because they said it was inappropriate. And the whole thing is it's conserving birds. But almost everything we know about bird window collisions is contained in his doctoral thesis published in 1979. So if you've paid attention to this problem at all, you see the 100 million to 1 billion birds figures cited by the Fish and Wildlife Service and every conservation organization out there. It was all his in his doctoral thesis. He doesn't get credit for it, but he really is the person who started the movement on this back in the 70s. His original estimate was 100 million to 1 billion birds die at glass in the US. And I stress the US because a lot of places misquote that by saying North America. Doesn't include Canada. This is just the United States. In 2014, Scott Loss moved the lower number up to 365 million to 1 billion birds die annually in the United States. We've used that number until this year. That works out to 1 million birds a day at the statistical low minimum die in the United States. That's staggering. But what's more staggering is we moved the number again this year in a scientific paper we published. It's now up to 1.2 billion to 3.5 billion, and perhaps double that. Very conservative numbers based upon our field research. It works out to 3.5 million birds die every day on average in the United States, hitting windows. Staggering. And we can't ignore it. It's happening around us every day, all year round, and it adds up. So we hear about all these stories, and I don't know if you heard about the big one in Chicago at the McCormick Place in 2023, where over 1,000 birds died in one morning at one building. But every single one of these big events happens in bad weather during peak migration, and none of them equal more than a couple thousand birds, usually less than 1,000. But we're talking 3.5 million birds on average per day, year round. So big city bright lights, you hear a lot of lights out programs going around the country right now. Great ideas, they're definitely beneficial. But the thing is, it's the glass, not the lights. When these big events occur, there are 1,000 or a couple thousand birds across the city. But if you think about it, if we have 1,000 dead birds, we need to account for 3.5 million per day, every day throughout the year. So we need 3,500 of these mass collisions daily to equal the overall number of birds dying hitting windows. So where is it happening? Here's the thing most people don't realize. 1% is happening in the big city cores where it gets all the publicity. And the reason it gets the publicity is the birds die en masse on sidewalks where people see them, reporters report on it. The problem is 44% is hitting residential homes where you have one or two at a time that go totally unnoticed. And you multiply that out through urban sprawl throughout the country, and you can begin to get a feel for the numbers. And then college campuses, corporate centers, any place that's green around corporate buildings, industrial buildings that have glass account for 56%. So one thing I've done with this talk is I've tried to gear it a little bit more towards residences, because the key thing with the residences, individuals don't have to ask their boss to do something about the window. We each can do something about it. So 3.5 million average daily collisions, 44% at residential homes, equals 1.5 million collisions daily homeowners can do something about. So 1.5 million a day. My yellow lab's barking at me. Stop. Excuse me. I don't know if you could hear the bark. But the key thing here is individuals don't have to ask for permission to do something about their own windows. It's been calculated that about 10 birds per residence die each year. So think of your neighborhood or a suburban area and multiply each house times 10, and that's how many birds on average probably dying in that neighborhood. So the problem is, excuse me, most people don't even realize the problem unless it's like this: a dead bird on your deck, a big mourning dove smudge on your window. The right-hand one is also a mourning dove where it hit hard enough to expel the mother's milk out of the crop and splattered it on the glass. In our field research, we do tests for window manufacturers to try to come up with bird-friendly glass. And we do direct observation in the wild with glass and wild birds. And literally, I would say more than 90% of the collisions that we actually observe do not leave any evidence that a standard homeowner or anybody even doing a casual carcass survey around a building would notice. Almost no bird leaves a real mark except things like doves or a real severe hit. And I had this as 50 to 80%, but the 50% is what we published in our recent paper. But that was under laboratory conditions, and we were looking for strikes that we actually observed, and the glass was spotless at the beginning of each experiment. And 80 is conservative as far as how many window collisions will not leave any evidence. And by the way, only 2% of the birds die instantly. The rest fly off. And the problem is, due to other papers that have been published on this from rehabilitators and veterinarian clinics, 70% of the birds that make it to a rehabber for professional care die later. And we don't find all these birds because everything eats birds. First of all, they fly off if they're injured to find a safe place. They're hiding in vegetation. They fall into ground cover under windows. And cats, even chipmunks. This chipmunk, if you can't see it, has a a goldfinch in its mouth. Just about everything will eat a dead bird. And to dispel one thing is, birds don't break their necks. Dr. Clem x-rayed hundreds of window collision victims, never found a broken vertebrae ever. It's usually concussions. We know about the danger of those, and blunt force trauma. Birds have air sacs all through their bodies, And if they rupture one, it actually inflates their body under the skin. And unless they're taken to a veterinarian that's trained to take care of that, it kills them, but it takes time. So they're flying around, slowly dying, but out of sight. And unlike predators, glass kills the most fit of the population as well as the unfit. So we're weakening the gene pool. So why do collisions occur? I think we know that. This is a picture of an actual glass facade of a building in fall at a local college. See-through effects, one of the most deadly. This is actually my own house where I'm sitting now. This is my front windows looking through my office to my back window of my office into the backyard. Birds faced with that see-through are usually hit with a tremendous force and don't recover. The upper half of the window shows reflective measures where it's dark behind that upper part. And so it's reflecting the facing habitat, again, lethal. More reflective habitat. This window is protected by Acopian bird sabers. I'll go over the details of these. These are probably 99.9% effective at deterring strikes. It's just parachute cord on 4-inch centers. See-through corridors are lethal. Sound barriers, bus stops, bicycle park places, all these things that are becoming very popular to be clad in glass are all killing birds everywhere. Plants inside windows, atriums of big corporate centers with trees in them. Small windows. This is actually, again, my house. I was sitting on the deck one morning drinking a cup of coffee and I heard a thud. I knew what the sound was, so I looked, and it was a juvenile robin had flown into that basement window. And when I took a picture of it, I could see what the bird thought it saw, clear passage. Looking at the house picture, you would think, why would a bird go through there? They don't associate glass or anything. They're used to going through tight spots and weaving through the forest. That looked like a perfectly good place for that bird to go. So it doesn't matter what size or what location, any place that birds and windows occur, you're going to have mortality. Again, here's a dove print on the side of a bay window. From a distance, it looks like something that you would never think a bird would hit, but close up, you can see why the bird thought it could go to a clear sky. So again, wherever birds and glass mutually occur, we're going to have dead birds. And it doesn't matter what time of day, weather, well, it does matter mostly during time of day, it's daylight. The nocturnal ones are incredibly rare. But weather conditions, no matter where birds occur with glass, they're going to die unless we do something about it. And most strikes, again, are reported in big cities because they get a lot of attention, but it isn't the problem. It's 1% of the problem. And 99% of the collisions are occurring in rural and more suburban areas, especially if you love birds and you feed a lot, you're going to get collisions. So the more birds in close proximity to the glass, the more bird strikes you're going to get. That bay window with the Acopian bird sabers actually used to get 100 strikes a year on average until the Acopian bird sabers went up, and I get maybe 1 or 2 now. So again, best predictor of how many birds you're going to kill is how many birds are in your yard close to your windows. So we're slowly building the list around the world of how many bird species have been documented. And this list grows constantly every time we make a new contact. Pretty much any bird that occurs near glass will end up on the death list eventually. And the fact is, we can do something about it, but glass does kill. These are all window collisions, by the way, in the museum I am in charge of. So solutions. So there are 2 things we can do. We either put up a physical barrier like netting to keep the birds away from the glass, or we make it visible to them. And the key thing to making it visible is what's called the 2x4 rule. That's what it's been coined. And it basically is any pattern on the glass on a vertical measure of 4 inches or a horizontal measure of 2 inches. And this is because when birds are flying around tree trunks, they're going to give it a wider berth because of their wings. But if they're going through branches, they can tuck through narrower areas. And it must be on the surface 1. This is the outside surface, because even pure, regular, untinted glass, if it's dark in the house and bright outside, can turn into a perfect mirror. So if you put stuff on the inside, it's totally masked by the reflection on the outside. So the most effective way is it must be on the outside. So using an estimate that was given to us of about 10 birds per year, if the average homeowner with decent habitat in their yard puts up anything that's 80% or more effective to prevent window collisions, you're going to save 100 birds in about 15 years. You won't even know it, because most collisions go unnoticed. And if you're not home, you don't hear the thud, or you don't see a dead body, you think the bird lived. But we're finding out that's not the case. So Copian bird savers, the left-hand window, this is my house. We just had this window replaced about a week ago, and I put the Copian bird savers up. Very, very effective. You can see how reflective that window is. You can somewhat see the lights and stuff inside, but most of it's just reflected habitat. The other picture is from the inside looking out. Obviously, it wasn't taken recently because it's green. So real simple, and somebody suggested I do a PowerPoint on this, or a handout at least. All I did was take J channel for vinyl siding, because the house is vinyl siding. And you can see the strip with the little slots in it. That's the nailing flange for nailing it on a house. I just used a utility knife and cut that off, so it looks like the bottom horizontal piece of just plain cream colored trim. Used a drilled a hole every 4 inches on the inside. Took parachute cord, or what's called 550 cord, cut it to the length of the window. You need the lighters there because you have to cauterize the ends or it'll fray. But you'll literally just do it a single overhand knot, no more. Slide it through the holes. I used outside Velcro, put it on the back of the strip, and just stuck it up. And in 5 minutes, it was installed. Took me about a half hour, 45 minutes to do the whole project. So it's very simple and incredibly effective measure. Copian bird savers. The Copians, again, that's the name of my title actually as well, because the person who makes these, his father funded our museum. They make these. I'll give you the contact information. You can buy them custom made for your window, but they're real easy to make, and it'd be a great chapter project. You can buy a 500-foot spool of paracord for about $50 and make these all day long for your members. And you can use a strip of wood, anything that matches your house. And the outdoor Velcro allows you to stick it up. And if you need to take it down, you just pull it off the Velcro. And on a big window like this, you can squeegee behind it, and it doesn't catch leaves, or spiders don't weave a web in it because they swing a little bit. Self-cleaning, no maintenance, lasts for years. Feather Friendly's another one of my favorite products. Feather Friendly sells what's called your do-it-yourself tape. It's literally just little vinyl dots that last 10 to 15 years on rolls of tape that you roll down the window, rub them on, peel the tape off, and it leaves a dot pattern. I put mine in a 2x4 pattern. They recommend a 2x2 pattern, which is much tighter and more effective with hummingbirds and stuff. But I have had very few collisions on this window, and you can see it from both inside and out. And it does not really affect your view. I can take pictures of my bird feeders through those. You just move away from the dots and go between them. Again, very effective. This is the do-it-yourself kits. It's just a roll of tape, 2 measuring tapes so you can line up the top and bottom, and a little squeegee to rub the tape on tightly, and then you peel the actual tape off and it leaves just the dots. And it comes in white and black. If you have see-through windows or deck railing that's glass, which isn't usually used in residential homes, but the black works better when it's see-through, and white's better when it's reflective. Kaleidoscape, this is the stuff that they use on buses for advertising. They'll print anything you want on it. You can even do solid colors, or they're plain white. Not really good for residential because it does impede your view a little bit. This is an example from inside and outside. This is Hawk Mountain Sanctuary nearby where I live, and they use it for educational signs, but it's good for that exact purpose. And this is put on the outside. You can see out through it on the right side. You can see the outdoors. It's attractive. Ding Darling National Wildlife Refuge, I think, has every window in their visitor center covered with Kaleidoscape. And it's very popular for educational tools. And but again, for residential, I'm not keen on it. You can also use the plain white Kaleidoscape, cut it into patterns. Again, you need to follow the 2x4 rule for it to be effective. But we've used this at school projects with, they were 6th graders. Kaleidoscape donated a whole bunch of their off-fall to us, and we did cutouts with the students and then applied them to the school building to reduce the collisions on a elementary school. So anything's possible. Kaleidoscape offers a clear product. On the right is the product, on the left is untreated. We have not tested this, but we have found that anything on Surface One, even if it's a mirrored film for windows, reduces strikes up to 50%. So I don't know how effective this is, but if you know someone that's having collisions and is totally against anything on their window, this is what I would say would be the last resort. At least it's going to cut it down a bit. They also sell tape in different colors that you can apply to your window. Again, not something I'm going to do to a window where I'm looking at my bird feeders, but if it's windows you don't use very often or up high, any pattern that uses that 2x4 rule is effective. Glass pens, real popular these days. Use a roller and just draw 1/4-inch lines down your window. You can scrape this stuff off and replace it, change it up, put it up when you're feeding birds, take it off when you're not feeding birds if you have different seasonalities. But again, inexpensive, simple, and effective. We've seen a lot of temper paint done temporarily on some big jobs where they were waiting for commercial installations, but were killing a lot of birds and wanted to stop it quickly. School projects, homeowners, a lot of different variations there. Window blinds, you can keep them down. Not very effective 90% of the time because of the outside glare, but if it's like this where the sun's actually highlighting the blinds, those can help. But again, it's inside, so it can be masked by any reflection. We have a toolkit that's available to anybody to use that has all the information, including the PowerPoint, but an original one, not the updated one. I haven't gotten it loaded up yet, with downloads with different costs of the different retrofits, and then a brochure on the product to have reprinted. You can put your own chapter logo on it and share with people. Things to avoid: hawk silhouettes, big misnomer. I hear it so often. People go, I put one hawk silhouette up and it solved the problem. No, they're just not seeing the problem anymore, or not noticing it. You got to follow the 2x4 rule. These UV products, the squares and the leaves and hummingbirds and stuff, not one of them tells you how many you actually need to be effective. They tend to be large stickers. They sell them in small numbers. People use them and think they're doing a good thing. But again, anything larger than your handprint on a window, you're going to get a strike eventually. And claiming that UV works, we've tested a lot of UV products. I would avoid these because they muck up your view. I would go with the Bird Savers or the Feather Friendly. It's a much smaller percentage of glass covered, and it's uniform and much more effective. These are expensive. They tell you to replace them periodically for the UV. And if you can see it, the birds can see it. It's not the UV that's doing the job. It's the actual sticker itself. Just to eliminate a misconception and a misquoted thing here, often you see it cited that bird feeders should be 30 feet or further from your windows. And this is based on Dr. Clem's research back in the 80s, where he ran a field experiment with bird feeders out to 30 feet, 10 meters. And the percentage went up until then, but he didn't go beyond it. So it's been misunderstood that beyond it is fine. Well, we don't know if the number kept going up. We didn't do 12 meters or 15 meters. So the key thing is to protect your windows and keep your feeders where you want them, or move them within 3 feet. Because if a bird's going to the feeder, it's going to land at the feeder. If it's flushed by a Cooper's hawk or a sharpshin, even if it leaves the feeder, it's not going to build up enough momentum to hurt itself on the glass, though the hawk might. You hear a lot of talk, at least I do, on ultraviolet. We've tested ultraviolet back in the early 2000s. We tested a retrofit film. The picture on the left is the film on glass that I took in my garage, and then enhancing it with a black light to show the UV. It's 99% effective, but the company has not made it commercially available because they didn't think there was enough of a market, and we haven't convinced them to do it yet. But there are products out there with UV. If you work for a school or a corporation that's replacing windows or building a new building, Walker Glass and Guardian Glass do offer products that claim to use UV. We've tested them. They are moderately effective, but both of them do have a visual component that humans can see. It's very minor, and stripes on the Walker, or little strips on the Walker, and the shading on the Guardian. And we don't know if it's the UV or the actual physical visible markers that are actually reducing the strikes. But again, they're not overly effective. They're in the 60th percentile. And I think that we should set the bar at least 80% effective before we call something bird friendly. But both Walker and Guardian Glass are big advocates of research, excuse me, and they do offer many patterns of glass that have visual components that are very effective. So the good news is industry is taking notice, but I would suggest that you ask all your friends to call up your local replacement window company, Anderson, Marvin, any of them, and tell them you want a quote on replacement windows that are bird friendly, because they are starting to listen. Very few outlets offer it. I couldn't get it from either Marvin or Anderson, though both of them supposedly somewhere in the country. Some of their outlets do offer bird-friendly glass. Unfortunately, they're offering, the one I heard about is one that I can tell you kills more birds than conventional glass, and that uses UV, because ultraviolet is used as an attractant in nature. That's how they find their mates, how they find food. It's a positive signal to them. And if it isn't strong enough, it's going to draw them into the window without actually alerting them to the danger that it's a solid surface. So there are a lot of options that any of us as homeowners can do. But we all need to do something, especially with our problem windows. And believe me, I have so many friends that have told me over the years, we don't get collisions. And I go over to their house and I show them the marks on the windows, look for dead birds in the bushes, find remains. It's happening everywhere, and 3.5 million a day, with 44% of those on homeowners' windows. We need to all do something about it. So again, birds matter. We get a lot of pleasure out of watching them. They do pollination, insect control, seed dispersal. Vultures are an incredibly valuable resource. We're lucky to have as many as we do, at least in my area. I don't know if you've heard about India, where they lost almost all their vultures, and it cost them billions and billions of dollars in resources to make up for the loss of removing dead animals, and thousands of people died from rabies, from the increase of wild dogs and bites from them because of the carcasses that they were no longer removing. So they really do serve our environment a huge service. And if I haven't bored you enough or put you to sleep, if you're at all interested, Dr. Clem published a book in 2022, I believe, called Solid Air. And it's written like Silent Spring. It's for the popular reader. Digs into some of the more technical stuff, but in a popular method. Gives you all the answers that you'd ever want to know about it, and it's sort of his personal life history of going through where he started back in grad school, where a professor said he heard about birds hitting windows. Check it out for a doctoral thesis. And Dr. Clem literally sat at first light at their library on campus, and within an hour, a mourning dove flew through the trees, slammed into the windows on the library, and fell dead at his feet. And that's how he got going on this in 1974. And that's it.
Thank you, Peter. I'm gonna get that book. I just looked it up. Is there any questions?
Sure, I have a question. So, did you ever study? I mean, it'd be so hard to study, but you think a lot of the birds that have a collision end up dying, but you probably aren't able to get a percentage. Is that correct?
No, we do. Using the rehabilitators. So what we did in our paper is, so we took a segment of our field research, which was a little over 1,300 observed bird window collisions. So this is a researcher sitting in an observation blind, documenting a bird hitting a window, an occurrence over 1,300 times. We tracked what happened to the birds, if they flew off, if they were stunned, and if they were stunned, how long they were stunned. Any bird that was stunned more than 5 minutes, we calculated could theoretically have been picked up by a homeowner, put in a box, taken to a rehabber. 70% of all birds, according to 2 recently published papers, stop, Charlotte. Excuse me. She's a 2-year-old yellow lab, insistent. 70% of birds that strike windows that make it to a rehabilitator die anyhow. They have damage to their eyes, blunt force trauma to their body, concussions, and that's how we came up with that number of 70%. So when you have a bird slam into your window, fall to the ground, and even if it flies up right away, 70% chance has a concussion or an eye injury or the like that will prevent it from surviving in the wild. You know, predators unable to gather food, or the concussion eventually kills it, causes it to be paralyzed. And to lessen that negative, I will point out that there are birds that survive. There was a bird bander in northeastern Pennsylvania, had a indigo bunting in the fall, hit his one window. Bird was unconscious for a full hour. He put it in a container of some sort. It seemed to recover, and he banded it and let it go. So this was in the fall. The next fall, almost to the day, the same bird hit the same window and killed itself. Now that's a negative, but the positive is that bird recovered from a serious collision, migrated south for the winter, migrated north for the breeding season, probably bred, and was migrating south. So they're incredible survivalists, you know, to add a little bit of positivity to this. But the thing is, window collisions are avoidable. Why risk killing all these birds? Depressing enough? Okay.
Any other,
I do have some. Charlotte, stop. I wanted to put stuff in the chat for you. I don't know how to do that on this though. Here. There are some resources. No, that didn't work. Let's see if I can do this again. There we go. Put links to feather friendly bird savers, Kaleidoscape, the Solid Air, the book. The toolkit is actually, and again, I need to update it. It's the original version on this link, but it's got all the pieces where anyone, even with no information, could give the talk I just did or similar to it. It has all the narration. You could just read it slide by slide. Tons of background information and other materials. The Bird Window Collision Working Group came up with this back in, well, we put it together in 2018 and presented at the National Convention in Milwaukee for Audubon. But we put it together to train people to give talks on bird window collisions. And it just needs to be updated, especially since a lot more information's out there. But you're welcome to download it and look for updates in the near future. And again, that link's in the chat. And then my contact information and Lee Altidona's information, though he couldn't make it.
I'm not seeing in the chat, Peter.
Oh.
Oh, now it's
I
loaded.
have to hit that little blue arrow. Like I said, you know, I've been doing this since 2020 and still don't know how to do it right half the time.
That's all right. I did have a question. Is there any research on stained glass windows? Would they be reflective or have they prove?
I would say a standard stained glass window, as long as it doesn't have a retrofit of clear glass over it that could cause a reflection, probably is totally safe. And then again, if they put glass over it to protect it, you know, if it's antique, they probably use what they use in department stores where it's non-reflective glass.
Mm.
Because you'd want it to be totally visible, so it'd probably be totally safe.
I see they use, I know the churches here in Morgantown, I think they use plexiglass over it.
But that can be just as reflective at times.
Yeah. Mhm.
How about
I don't know.
a screen? If you have a window screen in, does that break the reflection?
Absolutely, yeah, screens are probably the most effective, and most homeowners have screens. The problem is that the newer screens are usually going to only half screens, so half the window's exposed. And if any judge from my new Pella windows that I haven't actually checked the new Andersons I just got. They're so flimsy that if a bird does hit them, they're still going to hit the hard surface of the glass. So they will help, but the old-fashioned metal screens that they don't use anymore were much more effective. They bounced them off before they hit the glass. But yes, screens, anything that breaks up that reflection will definitely help. So screens are I would consider almost 100% effective. But again, they have to cover the whole surface.
I thought screens would be effective, but I didn't know.
No, that they're good, Jane.
Any other questions come to mind?
How about any criticisms? Did I go too fast? Did I cover too much? Did I put you to sleep?
Well, you have a depressing topic.
Yeah.
But it's good that you talk to people so that they're inspired to make changes, because we're more likely to sit down and watch TV than to put stickers on our windows.
But you know, the shame of it is, it's unless you really look for it, you're not going to know it's there. And you know, if you have windows, and especially if you have bird feeders, I mean, when I used to, before I put the Acopian bird sabers up on my main bay window, because of working with Dr. Clem, I would squeegee that window almost every single day. So when I'd come home, I could find any marks, and I could tell the difference between a moth hit or a bird hit. And I'm talking, I'm counting tiny little marks. In the course of a year, I may have found 5 bodies, but 100 impact marks. And now that I know that 50% at that level don't leave a mark, I was probably getting close to 200 strikes a year from one window. Now I live in perfect habitat and I feed heavily. And my feeders are at that magic mark of 30 feet, which is the maximum tested for impacts, unfortunately. Now all my windows facing them are protected one way or another, and I get very, very few collisions. And I literally, because of the experiments, I can get 300 juncos in my backyard at one time with the amount of bird seed we go through. The research site's my backyard, and I live in an old meadow. And because I have to check it at dawn and dusk at a minimum every day, even if students are working, I needed it close because it's 7 days a week when we're doing the research. So I have a tremendous amount of birds, but anybody that has any birds is going to get those collisions.
Wow.
So, out of curiosity, I see a lot of this focus seems to be on songbirds. I imagine that's because the lowest common denominator. If you follow the 2x4 rule, big birds also aren't going to fly in there. But forgive me if you mentioned this in the first 15 minutes. I had something I was preoccupied with. What's the status on, say, larger birds like owls, even crows? Is there much data on that?
Well, corvids are really very low on the number of collisions. I think mainly because they're very intelligent birds. Owls are a nocturnal event for the most part. So a surface marker isn't going to do anything for them if they're going to hit a window, and they do hit windows. The big thing is the little birds like kinglets and hummingbirds at the opposite end of the extreme. You need to go to a 2x2 inch pattern to be truly effective against their collisions. But the larger birds tend not to be an issue. I mean, we have them on the death list. They do hit. I mean, we even have a common loon and great blue heron and turkey vulture, but they're very uncommon, if that answers your question.
Makes sense. I imagine a turkey vulture fitting through a residential window, at least in my house, would be quite a feat.
Yeah, that record actually was a palatial cliff top home in Mexico where I got that record. And yeah, it was a lot of glass and big. And but a standard picture window like what I was showing at my house, we recently, in the last couple of years, had a bald eagle fly through one and end up in somebody's living room in eastern Pennsylvania. So the big ones can hit. I would think that if it had had Copian bird savers or feather friendly, it would have been prevented.
Yeah, my grandfather had a red shoulder hit his window at his house. And then we fitted it with some bird friendly stuff. And it was the same red shoulder. And he had one the year before hit. And we thought it was just chasing a bird, but it hit again.
That's usually what birds of prey are doing, is going after prey. I mean, there's a lot of times you'll find a mourning dove and a Cooper's hawk laying side by side under a window.
Yes, we've gotten calls about that. But I've watched at our center at the animal hospital, I've watched two robins in a tree near the window get in a fight, and one hit the window trying to get away from the other one, and it fell dead right at my feet.
And even if you have Copian bird savers or feather friendly, when they're fighting like that or, running from prey, I mean, they've documented birds flying into solid walls with the Cooper's hawk on their tail. So, I mean, nothing's 100% depending on the situation. I mean, I don't know about everybody on this call, but I have seen a disproportionate number of male Baltimore Orioles paired dead in the street because they apparently were fighting and a car hit them. And it's amazing how frequently that happens. And I think they must really be territorial and not pay attention.
Well, is there any last questions? Alrighty. Well, Peter, thank you so much for this amazing presentation. I'll see if we can, we'll send out our email and with some links, or make sure it's attached to our website so they can see all these links. We did that with the Wild Yard program that our DNR does. So this would also be a great resource for them to go to. And the presentation will be recorded and on our YouTube channel. So.
Okay. And if anybody has any questions, they can more than welcome to email me.
Okay, awesome. Well, I will be in touch with you, Peter, in the next coming days, but thank you so much. And thank you everyone for joining. Have a good night.
Thank you. It was marvelous.
Thank you.
Very
It's
helpful.
great.